At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, the machines at Lorraine's bedside went quiet in a way I'll never forget. The nurse, Danielle, touched my shoulder and left the room to give me time with my wife of 44 years. I sat in the orange vinyl chair I'd lived in for 3 weeks and held her hand until it wasn't warm anymore. Then I picked up my phone with fingers I didn't recognize and typed 2 words into the family group. She's gone. A marriage isn't just 44 years of shared breakfasts. It's 44 years of evidence that 2 people can love each other without conditions. My family had never bothered to read that evidence. My name is Thaddeus Ashworth. Most people call me Thad. I'm 71 years old, a retired architect, and for 38 years I've lived in a 1780s single house on Church Street in the South of Broad neighborhood of Charleston, South Carolina. The piazzas wrap around both floors. The garden in the back has a live oak that was old when General Washington rode past. Lorraine planted hydrangeas there 40 years ago, and they still bloom every spring, whether anyone's watching or not. Lorraine was a Charleston County school librarian for 31 years. She was from Savannah, 4 years younger than me, and she could hush a cafeteria of 100 children with a single raised eyebrow. She had been ill for a long time, 14 months from the day we got the news to the moment the machines went quiet. The last thing she said to me, about 3 hours before the end, was, "Walter, don't let them turn you into an ATM after I'm gone. Promise me." I promised. I didn't understand yet what I was promising. There were 9 people in the family group chat. My son Bradley, his wife Courtney, their daughter Hazel, my daughter Stephanie, her husband Gregory, their son Ethan, and their daughter in college. 2 of Lorraine's sisters from Savannah. 9 people who had known Lorraine longer than some of them had been alive. I sent the message at 11:52 p.m. I sat in that hospital chair and watched the read receipts light up one by one. Bradley read it at 12:03 a.m. Stephanie read it at 2:47 a.m. Courtney read it at 6:14 a.m. By 8 o'clock the next morning, every person in that group had seen those 2 words. Not one of them replied. Not a heart emoji. Not a single, "I'm sorry, Dad." Not even a, "Call us when you can." Just silence. The kind of silence that tells you more than 1,000 condolences ever could. Before I tell you what my son texted me the next morning at 6:15 a.m., let me ask you 3 things. What time is it where you're watching from? What city? And have you ever sent a message so important that the silence afterward felt like a second death? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. That Tuesday night, driving home alone from the medical center with Lorraine's reading glasses still on the passenger seat, I had no idea that silence was about to teach me the most expensive lesson of my life. 44 years. I'd given that family everything I had. 44 years. My wife had tried to warn me what they really were. And at 11:52 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, they showed me without saying a single word. I never went to bed that night. I sat in Lorraine's armchair by the bedroom window, still in the clothes I'd worn to the hospital, watching the Charleston sky turn from black to that pale gray that comes before a low country sunrise. At 6:15 a.m., my phone buzzed for the first time since I'd sent, "She's gone." I thought, finally, someone is calling. I thought, Bradley or Stephanie or one of Lorraine's sisters. I thought, someone remembered that I just watched my wife die alone in a hospital room. It was a text from my son Bradley. "Dad, sorry about Mom. We need to deal with the estate fast. Can you forward me the will this morning? Courtney's brother is a CPA and he can walk it through. Time sensitive." I read it 3 times. Not once did the word funeral appear. Not once did the word how, as in how are you, appear. He didn't ask when I was coming home. He didn't ask if I needed anything. He didn't even ask if I was alone. Estate, fast, time sensitive. My wife had been dead for 6 hours and 28 minutes, and my firstborn son was already calculating what her death was worth to him. My hand went numb. I set the phone face down on the windowsill and walked to Lorraine's desk in the guest bedroom. She'd kept the family finances in a locked lower drawer for 40 years, and the key had always lived in the lid of her grandmother's porcelain teapot. I opened that teapot for the first time in my life. Inside was a note in her careful, shaky handwriting. "Walter, everything you need is in the green folder. I love you. I'm sorry." The green folder was thick. I spread the bank statements across the dining room table the way she used to spread her library cards when she was sorting returns. 12 months of transactions from our joint account. I started a list on a yellow legal pad. $4,200 to Bradley. Business expansion $2,800 to Courtney. Boutique inventory $6,000 to Stephanie. Medical emergency $3,500 to Bradley. Bridge loan $1,800 to Stephanie. Car transmission $2,400 to Bradley. Tax quarter, line after line, month after month. $32,400 in 12 months, transferred out of the account my wife and I had built by skipping vacations and eating leftovers twice a week. Lorraine had written tiny notes in the margins. Beside Bradley's $3,500 loan. Asked again, promised to pay back by Easter. Didn't. Besides Stephanie's $6,000 medical emergency. Gregory's new boat, same week. My wife had been documenting them. For years, in her librarian's handwriting, she'd been cataloging our children the way she used to catalog overdue books. I opened my laptop and pulled up his social media page. He'd left it set to public. The top post, dated 2 weeks before Lorraine slipped into the final coma, was a photo of him and Courtney on a white sand beach at a luxury Mexican resort. Champagne flutes raised. The caption read, "Best year of our lives so far." I looked up at Lorraine's portrait on the mantle, the one from our 35th anniversary, where her hair was still brown and her eyes were laughing at some joke I'd told just before the photographer clicked. "You knew," I said to the portrait. "You tried to tell me. I didn't want to hear it." I picked up my phone, deleted Bradley's text without replying, and opened a new note. At the top of the note I typed, "Promises I'm going to keep for Lorraine." Then beneath it, one single sentence, "They will not empty me out." The funeral was on Saturday. Bradley arrived 30 minutes late and checked his phone during the eulogy. Stephanie cried the loudest during the hymns and answered 2 calls during the graveside service. Ethan, my 19-year-old grandson, stood beside me at the casket and held my elbow when my knees almost gave out. He was the only one who said, "I love you, Grandpa. I'm so sorry." I filed that away. On Tuesday morning, 8 days after Lorraine died, I drove to Harold Callahan's office on Broad Street. Harold had been our family lawyer for 28 years. His office smelled like leather, old paper, and the bourbon I knew he kept in the bottom drawer. He poured me a cup of coffee I didn't want and sat down across from me with a folder I'd never seen before. "Thad," he said quietly, "Lorraine updated her will 8 months ago. There are things you need to know before the children ask you anything else." I set the coffee down. My hands were steady for the first time in a week. He opened the folder. Lorraine's signature was on every page. Clean, careful. The same handwriting that had signed Christmas cards for 44 years. Harold read it slowly so I would not miss anything. The Church Street house, valued at $1.2 million, went entirely to me, held in a revocable trust in my name alone. Her life insurance policy, $425,000, listed me as sole beneficiary. She had removed Bradley and Stephanie as contingent beneficiaries the same week she updated the will. The investment account she'd inherited from her father, $580,000, was now under my sole control. Our joint retirement accounts, $780,000, were mine outright. And the children's inheritance, the money they had been calculating for years, had been restructured into a discretionary trust of $650,000. The trustee was me. I decided the amount, the timing, and the conditions. If I died before distributing it, the remainder went to Ethan and to a medical research foundation set up in Lorraine's name. Harold finished reading. He looked at me over his glasses. "She was very specific, Thad. She wanted you protected." Then he slid a second item across the desk. A sealed envelope, my name written on the front in her careful handwriting. "For Walter, to be read after I'm gone." I opened it in the parking lot. Her hand had been shaky from the medication by then, but her words were clear. "My love, I watched them treat us like a resource for 20 years. I stopped telling you because you needed to believe they would rise to it. They didn't. So I changed the will without telling anyone. Not because I don't love our children, but because I love you more, and I refuse to leave you unprotected. Go to Italy like we planned. Stay in Montalcino for me. Don't give them a single dollar until they earn it back as your children, not as your creditors. I'm sorry I had to do this quietly. I didn't have time to fight them and fight the cancer. Choose yourself, Walter. Just once. For me. All my love, Lorraine. I sat in my car for 37 minutes before I could drive. When my phone rang, Bradley, for the 4th time that day, I answered it for the first time. Before he could speak, I said, "We need to talk, all of us, at my house, Saturday, 2 p.m. Bring whatever you want to say." Then I hung up. When I left Harold's office that morning, I wasn't a grieving widower walking out. I was a man Lorraine had armed for war. They arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Bradley pulled into the driveway in a brand new black luxury sedan that hadn't been there at the funeral. Stephanie and Gregory came in their family SUV. Courtney followed 5 minutes later in her own SUV, carrying a casserole dish she'd brought as if this were a Sunday supper. I sent the grandchildren to the basement with snacks and Hazel's coloring books. Then I poured coffee for everyone and sat them at the dining table where Lorraine had served 44 Christmases. I positioned myself at the head of the table, with her portrait on the wall directly behind me. She watched the whole thing. Bradley cleared his throat first. "Dad, we appreciate you having us over, but we've been patient, and we need to talk about timeline. I was thinking the Church Street house could be listed by the 1st of next month. Courtney's brother knows a realtor in Mount Pleasant who can move quickly." Stephanie spoke before he finished. "Dad, I was counting on my share for Braden's college. Tuition's due in January. I need to know what to expect." Courtney smiled the way she smiled at Christmas. "My brother can handle all the paperwork for free. It would just save everyone time." Nobody asked how I was sleeping. Nobody asked about Lorraine's hydrangeas. Nobody mentioned that the casserole was sitting on my counter while they discussed selling the house she died in. I let them talk for 15 minutes. I took notes on a yellow legal pad. Bradley got impatient. "Dad, did you hear anything we said?" I looked up. "I heard all of it. I have notes." I slid the legal pad across so they could see their own words written down. Then I reached into the folder beside me and pulled out Lorraine's sealed letter. "Your mother wrote me a letter 8 months before she died. I'd like to read it to you." I read it, every word, without pausing, without softening anything. When I got to the line, "Earn it back as your children, not as your creditors," Stephanie's face drained completely. When I got to, "I love you more," Bradley stood up. "That can't be legal. She wasn't in her right mind." "Sit down, Bradley." Harold Callahan verified every word. The will was updated, witnessed, and notarized 8 months before her diagnosis worsened. She knew exactly what she was doing. Then I said the thing I'd been rehearsing in my head all week. Here's what happens now. The Church Street house stays mine. The life insurance stays mine. The investment accounts stay mine. The retirement accounts stay mine. Your inheritance is held in a discretionary trust that I control. I decide the amount. I decide the timing. I decide the conditions. Bradley's voice cracked. "You can't do this to us." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said the line I will remember on my own deathbed. "I'm not doing this to you, Bradley. I'm doing it for your mother. She asked me, in her own handwriting, in her last clear month, to love you by not rescuing you anymore. And I am going to honor that, even if it costs me every relationship in this room." Stephanie was crying. Courtney was already on her phone, probably calling her CPA brother. I stood up. "You have 30 minutes to leave my house. The next time you walk through this door, I want to hear how you've grieved your mother, not how you've calculated her." They drove away in their nice cars thinking they'd lost the inheritance. What they'd actually lost was the easy version of their father, and they weren't getting him back. The backlash arrived in 3 waves, exactly as Lorraine had predicted in the margins of her bank ledger. Wave 1 was guilt. Stephanie sent a 4-paragraph email about how I was dishonoring Mom's memory and how Lorraine would never have wanted this kind of conflict in the family. I read it twice and saved it to a folder I'd labeled "For My Records." I did not reply. Wave 2 was threat. Bradley called Harold Callahan's office and demanded the will be contested. He claimed Lorraine had been unduly influenced during her medication. Harold called me that afternoon, his voice almost amused. "Thad, I drafted that will with her in this office. She was sharper than most of my full-paying clients. He's bluffing. But I'd recommend you change the locks on Church Street and let me file a formal warning, just in case." I changed the locks the next morning. Wave 3 was silence. By the 3rd week, the calls stopped. The texts stopped. The emails stopped. For the first time in 20 years, my phone did not ring with a request. It was the most peaceful week I'd had since Lorraine got her diagnosis. On a Thursday afternoon, Ethan showed up at my door without warning. He was wearing his orange apron from the hardware store where he worked and carrying a covered dish. "Grandpa, my girlfriend's mom made you lasagna. She said you probably weren't eating right. I just wanted to check on you." He was the first person in 3 weeks to ask if I was okay. We sat on the back piazza for almost 3 hours. He told me he'd heard his parents and his Uncle Bradley laughing about Lorraine's notes years ago. Mom's keeping receipts, can you believe it? And he'd been too young to know what it meant. Now he understood. He was ashamed. "Grandpa, I don't want anything from you. I just want to know you, while there's still time." I gave him a key to the back gate that night. Not the house, just the gate to the garden where Lorraine's hydrangeas were still blooming. The next morning, Mrs. Ruth Prescott came over from next door with a chicken casserole. She was 72, widowed for 30 years, and had been Lorraine's book club friend since 1994. She set the casserole on the counter and pulled a brown leather journal out of her tote bag. "Lorraine asked me to give this to you when you were ready. She said I'd know." It was Lorraine's hidden journal, 3 years of entries documenting every loan, every excuse, every birthday Bradley forgot, every Mother's Day Stephanie skipped. The handwriting got shakier toward the end. The last entry, written 4 days before she stopped being able to write, said simply, "Walter is going to Italy. He doesn't know it yet." I booked the flight that night. Single ticket, first class. 2 weeks in Tuscany, 1 week in Rome. I tucked Lorraine's photograph into the front pocket of her old passport holder and left it on the kitchen counter where I'd see it every morning until I left. Ethan agreed to house sit. Mrs. Prescott offered to water the hydrangeas. I left for the airport at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. The Charleston sky was that same pale gray it had been the morning Lorraine died. Ethan dropped me off at departures. Mrs. Prescott waved from the passenger seat. Bradley had not called in 6 weeks. Stephanie had sent 1 email I hadn't opened. I boarded a plane to Rome, carrying Lorraine's photograph and something heavier than grief. I was carrying her permission to live. 6 months after Lorraine died, I stood in a kitchen in Montalcino, learning to roll fresh pasta with a 78-year-old woman named Sophia, who spoke almost no English. She showed me how to fold the dough with the heel of my hand. She showed me how to dust it with semolina, and when I told her, with the help of her grandson translating, that my wife had wanted us to come here together, Sophia stopped working and put both her flour-covered hands on my cheeks. "In Italy," her grandson translated, "family is sacred, but sacred means responsibility, not permission." I laughed for the first time in 8 months. Then I cried into Sophia's apron, and she let me. I came home from Italy a different man. Now it's been a year since Lorraine died. The Charleston hydrangeas bloomed again this spring. I tend them every morning with the same coffee mug she used to wash. Ethan comes over every Sunday now. We work in the garden. We cook from Lorraine's old recipe cards. And last week he started teaching me how to use a smartphone properly. He laughs at me. I let him. Mrs. Prescott and I started a Tuesday night book club for widowers at the Charleston Library. 6 men, 4 books a month. We talk about marriages and we talk about grief, and sometimes we just sit and don't say anything. I volunteer at the hospice on Wednesdays now, holding the hands of men whose wives are dying the way I held Lorraine's. I have not given a single dollar to my children since the day they left my house. Bradley showed up at my door on a Saturday in October, exactly 1 year and 3 days after Lorraine died. He looked thinner, older. He stood on the piazza and waited until I opened the screen door. "Dad, may I come in? I'm not here for money. I just want to talk." I let him sit at the kitchen table. He did not look at Lorraine's portrait. He looked at his hands. "I've been in therapy for 6 months. I needed to tell you that what I did the morning after Mom died was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I'm not asking for the trust. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to say it out loud, in this house, while you can still hear me." He cried. I let him. I made him coffee. I asked about Hazel, and his face changed when he talked about her. I listened for almost an hour. When he stood to leave, he asked the question I knew was coming. "Dad, is there a way back?" I thought about Lorraine's letter. I thought about her last journal entry. I thought about Sophia's flour-covered hands on my cheeks in a kitchen 4,800 miles away. Bradley, I said, an apology isn't a reset button. You don't deserve my forgiveness because you asked for it. You earn it by becoming someone worth forgiving. Come back next month. Tell me what you've learned. Then come back the month after. That's how trust rebuilds, not in one Saturday afternoon, in years. He nodded. He left quieter than he came. Grief taught me something I want to leave you with tonight. The people who love you don't show up when you're useful. They show up when you're broken. And the ones who only show up when you're useful, they were never really there at all. Lorraine knew this. It took her dying for me to learn it. So tell me in the comments, who showed up for you when you were broken? What did they bring? Send this video to anyone who has buried a spouse and lost the family at the same time. And subscribe, because more stories are coming about the widower who finally chose himself. See you next time.